I'm not going to give you the same advice that everyone gives in these videos about not caring what people think. They always say the same thing. No one's thinking about you, so just do what you want, which could be helpful advice, but you've heard it a million times, right? And you're still watching this video. So instead, I'm going to focus on two different things that are really important to not caring what people think. And it's going to make sense once I explain it. But the first is to not lie, including white lies. Like really try to not lie. Try your best. And the second is to seek out rejection. Okay, so why is not lying important in terms of not caring what people think? The reason is because your gut instinct, your thoughts and your gut instinct are based on how much you've told the truth in the past. Like, it will be corrupted the more you lie. Like, hypothetically, let's say you lied every single time someone spoke to you. What would happen? Well, what would happen is you wouldn't know up from down. Like, you wouldn't know what is good for you or what's bad for you because you would lie to yourself. Or you'd be like, oh yeah, like eating junk food 24/7, that's great. That's really healthy for me. You wouldn't know up from down, right? So it's like the way to really be honest with yourself is to just be as honest as you can with other people. And I know some people are like, oh, well, it's okay to have like white lies. I personally think it's better to just not lie at all, because even white lies will impact your ability to have really honest thoughts and feelings. So if you could, it would be ideal to never lie. And I'm not saying that I never lie, but I am saying that when I lie or when you lie, just make sure you are noting it as wrong. I'm not, because it's impossible to tell the truth 100% of the time, to like never tell a white lie. I don't know anyone who's ever done that. Maybe like the religious figures, maybe they did that. But for us human beings, like chances are we will tell some white lies. But the important thing is to acknowledge that it's wrong. Because sometimes people will defend lies as if they were the right thing to do because they calculated the outcome. They really calculated what the other person was going to feel if they said it some certain way. But it's important not to do that because you can't really calculate the outcome. Like really, you have to have faith that being honest will get you the best possible outcome. And your gut instinct, your thoughts and your actions, being truthful will most align you with what is most authentic to you, right? Because people talk so much about authenticity, but the way to be authentic is by not lying, and even white lies. My throat's a little dry. Hold on. I'm gonna take a sip of green tea. Yeah, even white lies, because if I kind of lost my train of thought. Let's see. Yeah, even white lies, because even though it's small, they start to add up, right? Because when someone asks you a question, like that's kind of subjective. What you want to do is be as truthful as possible. Ideally, right? You'd want to be as honest as possible because that would be the right answer. But sometimes we're trying to calculate what other people think, and then we're trying to say something that we think will make us look good. Like there's this quote, I first heard it from Jay Shetty, but it's not his quote, I forgot, but it's, I'm not what I think I am. I'm not what you think I am. I'm what I think you think I am. So a lot of people, when they're caring so much about people's opinions, they're trying to calculate like what would make me look best in the other person's eyes. But if you don't, but the thing is like that complicates your thoughts so much to the point where like you'll look kind of nervous in front of the other person and you won't seem confident. Because people can kind of sense when you're being inauthentic like that. But if you're just honest and you're just telling the truth as best you can, people will sense that you have that authenticity, that you have like this magnetic energy, because it's like it'll be real, it'll be grounded. So that's why it's really important, because if you know who you are and you've been honest with yourself, then you won't really seek other people's approval too much. Of course you will to an extent, because we want to be able to fit in society and like help people, and that requires people's approval, but it won't be based on like lying to get it. And I think that's where a lot of worrying what other people think comes from, is like we want to try and figure out a way to calculate how they could like us best. And that's lying, right? Because it's like in those scenarios, you're not being honest with yourself. You're not like telling them exactly what you think, you're telling them what you think they want to hear. So that's why it's probably the most important part of not caring what people think, is because if you lie, if you try and calculate what they think, then by definition, you're already caring what they think. So if you're just like, all right, you know what, I'm just going to tell the truth and like whatever happens, happens, then you won't care as much what they think. So that's step one. Step one is to try and be honest. And since I've been doing this for the past maybe like 5 years, I really try not to tell white lies. And you might be thinking like, oh, I don't really lie. It's like, have you ever used someone else's Netflix account? That's kind of like a lie, right? And I'm not saying that I never lie. But it's just important to admit when it is a lie. Like I went to a cafe earlier in the day and I typed in my email. It asked for like my name and email, and I typed in a fake email. But I acknowledge now, I'm like, okay, that was wrong. I shouldn't have done that because it wasn't true. So that'll kind of like somewhat, a little bit corrupt my instinct and thoughts. Okay, so now that we covered that why not lying is important, next we want to talk about seeking out rejection. So why do we want to seek out rejection? Well, because this idea of like, oh, just don't worry about what people think and like they're not thinking of you, so you just be yourself. Yeah, that's like helpful, but you're not really facing any uncomfortable feelings. Like the way to get over uncomfortable feelings, fear, anxiety is with exposure. So what you could do is you could seek out rejection. You could put yourself in uncomfortable positions where you feel like you're worried about what the other person thinks. And then you'll realize that even in the worst case scenario, and you maybe not the worst case scenario, but like even in like a not great scenario where you feel that uncomfortable feeling where like people are judging you, you realize like it's not that bad. It's not going to like change your world, and it's really about how you handle it. Like the difference between people who really care what people think and the people who don't is just how they handle it. Like some people will still feel that judgment, but it won't impact their decisions, and they'll continue to like focus on their goals. And this is how people overcome it. And this is how like exposure therapy works. Like if you were to go to exposure, I'll use more of an extreme example, but if you were to go to exposure to therapy and you were getting exposure therapy because you were afraid of elevators, basically what the therapist would do is they would try and figure out where the point is where you're at right now. So maybe you feel comfortable looking at a picture of an elevator, but not going in one. So then they would show you, here's a picture of an elevator. Okay, now let's walk towards the elevator. Let's walk towards one. We'll be like 5 feet from it. Is that comfortable? And it has to be voluntary. It has to be voluntary with the patient, right? But that's what they would do. They would slowly get you to the point where you're exposed to the elevator, and then you become desensitized to it. So if you are seeking out rejection or uncomfortable feelings like this, eventually you'll kind of get bored and desensitized to it to an extent. There'll always be some level of fear of people's opinions, and I think that a certain level of it is healthy because that fear, the fear in and of itself of other people's opinions is not the problem. It's when it like goes out of control and holds you back from doing things that are really important to you. Like things like making videos if that's something you want to do, or putting yourself out there in some other way, or like a job opportunity, a relationship, a friendship. Like these things, they are important, right? They're important that you handle them the way you decide to in your life because it's your life, you know? It shouldn't be based on other people's opinions. So that's why you seek out rejection. So what are some ways you can, I just kicked my tripod. So what are some ways you could seek out rejection? Okay, so I did this rejection therapy, right? So it was for 20 days. I did like a new challenge. Sometimes I think I did a couple that were the same, but for 20 days, I essentially did a new challenge. And some of them were like, okay, I went to the coffee shop and I asked for a free coffee. I asked a stranger to do like an outfit check with me. I asked to interview a stranger. I just did a lot of things that I knew would make me slightly uncomfortable, because then you become comfortable in uncomfortable situations, especially uncomfortable social situations. So you could create your own form of like rejection therapy. And the way to do that is by listing out things that maybe you feel a little fearful of doing, you know, because you're like, oh, people will judge me. But it doesn't have to be something extreme. It just has to be something that makes you feel uncomfortable. Because the more you feel that uncomfortable feeling and face it, the less intense it will be and the less of a hold it'll be. And the more you'll be able to face that feeling and still make decisions that are not necessarily determined by those feelings. Like, you don't have to follow your feelings, right? Like, I'm sure you've done this before, where like you felt nervous about maybe a test in school, but you still went to school that day, right? You didn't run away from it. You were like, okay, I still have to go take the test. Even though you felt uncomfortable, you still acted in a way that is not necessarily aligned with how you felt. It was aligned with, the plan, the goal, right? So you can follow your goals rather than following your feelings. So what are some things you can do to create your own little like rejection therapy? Well, it could be like, if you normally, when you order a coffee, you don't really have a conversation with the barista, maybe set the goal of being like, okay, I think that's a good level goal for me, is to have a conversation with the barista and like, I don't know, like ask them where they're from. If that would make you feel slightly uncomfortable, then that's the level that you have to continue from. And you could do this for whatever level you're at, right? You could do this for whatever level you're at. And you could, sorry, I'm repeating myself. You could do this for whatever level you're at. Because when I make these videos, I usually try to repeat myself when I say the phrase the perfect way. But now I'm going to try and do it without making that many cuts. So that's why I'm like kind of repeating myself. I'm like naturally doing that. Anyway, you could set it for whatever like level you're at, and you really just have to be honest with yourself. This is where like being honest with yourself comes in again. It's like you have to be honest with yourself with what level you're at, because like you may think like, oh yeah, I could easily have a conversation with the barista, but then tomorrow when you go and do it, you might feel that uncomfortable feeling. So it's like, be honest with where you're at, and then just try and build from there. So it could be like, approaching someone you're attracted to. That's one level of rejection therapy. Asking someone to make a video with you. Oh, for me, I took a selfie with some people. I laid down in the middle of like a busy tourist area because I was like, oh, this will make me uncomfortable because I'm normally worried like, oh, what will people think? But people, like I said, the advice from the beginning, people don't really care that much, right? It's more about how you feel about yourself. But yeah, so create that little like rejection therapy for you, and if you do that, then you'll be able to make sure that you're facing that fear, and the more you face it, the easier it gets. There's a quote from this book called Dare: The New Way to End Anxiety, but it's, your ability to overcome anxiety is directly proportional to your willingness to face it the right way. So what does that mean? It means that if you actually face it the right way, like if you keep, let's say in this case, you keep doing these rejection therapies, you keep putting yourself in uncomfortable positions to make yourself comfortable, then over time, you'll become comfortable in those situations. Whereas facing it or feeling it the wrong way is being controlled by it, because it doesn't have to have control over you. Like these like, oh, worrying what people think, and like fear, any types of fear that are irrational, because sometimes it's rational fears, like you don't want to be eaten by a coyote. There have been coyotes on my street before, and that's a rational fear. I'm like, I don't want to hang out with a coyote. Anyway, so if it's an irrational fear, it's something you can overcome. And if you're able to face it, you're willing to face it, then you can overcome it. But if you're being controlled by it, then it's going to keep getting worse. If you keep running away from it, it keeps getting worse. The more you run, the bigger the problem gets. But the more you face it, the more courageous you become. And the more courageous you become, the easier it is to not care what people think. Yeah, so those are the two main areas. And some other things that I think could help is like, while you're being honest with yourself, to really think about like what you want out of life. Like what kind of life would you want? Because if you had something that was like so purposeful to you, like maybe it's making videos, then it'd be a lot easier to be authentic, because you'd have something that was like magnetic to you. It's like you would talk about it, you'd be passionate, you would light up when you would talk about making videos. And if you had that passion, then caring what people think becomes a little bit easier, because you love doing it. I'm kind of speaking to myself right now. I love making videos. I've been making comedy skits for the past like 4 years, and now I'm making these YouTube videos, and I really enjoy doing it. So it's like, for myself to be authentic, it would be making these videos. And I really want people to not look back at their lives and regret, to not look back in their lives and be like, oh man, I could have put myself out there, but I didn't really try. Because that's like one of the most significant regrets of old people. Statistically, a lot of times people regret that, right? So I hope my page can help people not regret that. Yeah, still drinking the tea. Hmm. How do I want to end this video? What do I think I should say? And listen, overcoming people's opinions and becoming that authentic version of yourself is not going to be easy. It may be one of the most difficult things you do, but I promise you, it will be worth it. Life's not easy, but it's worth it. Take care.